誰か一番に来てくれた人が音量のテストのお手伝いになってもらいます。誰かいらっしゃるかな。よいしょ。よいしょ。よし、やっていきます。以前保存したデータ1分くらいちょっと見ただけで全然やってないです。ポチッ。ダゴンは HP ラブクラフトの作品をストーリーと世界観に焦点を合わせて忠実に再現したインタラクティブなゲームです。選択やアクションもなければここ大事。持ち物を管理する必要もありません。移動はストーリーに沿って進むことに制限されます。よし。オーブ。
I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more.
ポチッと。はい、ポチッと。物語が進展するようなトリビアの中には隠されているものもあります。はいはい、メインメニューこっちでこれ
Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below.
ダメよ
Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate.
痛み止めにモルヒネは使えますよ。
When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
なるほど。
It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation. So that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
海軍の捕虜として公平に配慮を持って扱われた。ここか。
So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time.
一人で逃げたのか。 これか。
When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings.
ダメな。
Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight.
なるほど。ああ、これか。眩しい。
The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land.
あった。
But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know. For my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous.
おお、なんだ、びっくりした。なんだこれ。なんだ、イカか。
When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see.
私はイカですか。
And in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished.
驚きより恐怖の方が大きかったのである。
For there was in the air, and in the rotting soil, a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other, less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending
タコ
plain.
いだ、タコ。
Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear.
これ、あ、嫌なやつ。元気いいな。
The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet.
これか。日朝。
As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths.
なるほど。
So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my ears as I might. Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things.
ただ、鳥いない。
For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens.
アンモニアイトいる、アンモニアイト。
As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time.
いやでっけえな。昔の生き物だから大きいのか。
That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue.
でっけえしでっけえし。
On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal.
果敢に出発したってどこさ行くの？そこさ行くとか。
All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
なんだこれ、なんだこれ。うわー、なんかリアル。写真みたいだ。なんだこれ、カニ？カニっぽい。これタコっぽい。
That night, I
うわ、
encamped,
ちょっとこれ
and
嫌
on
な
the
やつだ
following
な。
day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I'd first espied it.
いや、気持ち悪いな。
By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance. An intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night. But ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain,
ギボス状の月ってなんてやつだ。
I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more.
あ、半分ってこと？
Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again.
うん、きれいきれい。
And in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day.
なんで？
Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy.
ああ、そういうことか。
Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence.
あ、荷物持てと。
I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night.
これは怖い。
Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost,
失楽園。
and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness.
魔王。
As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual.
100メートル降りたんだ。
Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps, where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me. An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself.
3時とか6時とか9時になるやつじゃない。
But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express. For despite its enormous magnitude, and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm.
Oh.
And revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books.
これがクトゥルフ神話のこと。
Consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world.
これ真ん中オクトパス先輩で。
but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound.
これ？どっち？これ見たい。ダゴンには多くのテーマや物語を語る章が含まれているが、これらはラブクラフトが後期の作品で進化させたものである。何らかの石碑などを通して物語を語る日記やキャラクターのメモ、海から浮かび上がる島、クトゥルフの呼び声、実際の出来事や神話に基づいたフィクションの生き物や神、クトゥルフ神話の起源。
distinctly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size, were a array of bas reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a Dore. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men.
これ
Though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto,
しない
or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background. One of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself.
でもさっきの魚大きかったよ。この人たちはもっと大きいの？
I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it.
何あ、これか。金の斧
With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters.
お
Loads. It darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the market, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods.
いや、これで雷になったら怖い。
When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital,
ほら。
brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention.
ああ、ここ病院だったんだ。 テーブルクロスだと思ったらった。
Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing. Nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe.
私歩けるの？
Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god. ダゴン、ダガン。へえ。へえ。へえ。進みます。読みたい人はちょっと止めて読んでください。へえ。かん。 But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries.
へえ。ふーんとへえしか言ってないの。こっちか。どうもどうも。なになになに？次何？もうここ来たばっかりじゃん。
It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing.
ギボス状ってさっきの半分のお月さん？
I tried morphine,
なして。
but the drug has given only transient surcease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave.
でしょうね。
So now, I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men.
やっちゃうの？やっちゃうの？あ、待って、その前に。ラブクラフトはタバコが嫌いだった。それはいいことだ。自分を大人に見せるため、そして大人の気分を味わうために12歳の頃にタバコを吸っていたが、友人であるラインハート・クライノーとのやりとりの中で長ズボンを着るようになってからすぐにやめたと言っていた。長ズボン？長ズボン？のび太の時代は捨てらったってこと？酒に関しては美味しいと思ったこともなければ進んで飲みたいとも思わない。 酒を飲むと個人的な嫌悪感が刺激されるので私は飲まない。はあ。ほどほどにっていうやつですよ。
Often, I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man of war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling, floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols, and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of the day when they may rise above the billows to drag down into their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of the day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium.
あれなんか海の中に神殿あるとこあるよね。
The end is near.
何なんか変わった？なんとすればいい？そのベッドもやろうぜ。
At the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me.
どうも、こんにちは。
God, that hand!
ああ。
The window! The window!
何？抜けませんよ。ウィンドウバーン。幻覚じゃねえの？違うの？なるほどね。いやなんか原作の本があるらしいけども活字で読むっていうのがな、クトゥルフ神話チラチラっと動画で見たことはあるけど、トリビアってなんだ？あ、これか。あ、これしか見てないんだ。まだいっぱいあった？無料の分だからこれしかないってこと？それとも他にあった？そっかそっか。クトゥルフ神話、クトゥルフの神々が 神々がいたよっていう証拠が海の底にあったって話？あれ？いや、海の底にはまだその時の神様を崇拝してる何かがいるよってこと？神様は石碑に書かれてだった人で、石碑に向かって頭下げてた巨人みたいなやつが海の底でまだ生きてるってこと？本編もやりたいような難しいようなまあ母ちゃんが興味あるような内容ではあったけども、なんか他にあるかな？また何かあったら探しておきます。ほとんど喋ってないですが終わりますでは、一緒にというか文字を一緒に読んでふーんって思ってくれればそれでいいです。では終わります。へばなー。